I've got two things to cover. One is intellectual property and one is regulations, which happen to be medical device regulations. So I'm very aware that for people in the room, this might be slightly left of field, and I'm very aware in the room that someone's already mentioned you've got a patent.
Yes. Several.
Okay. Granted patent?
Granted, yeah.
That's excellent. We talk about patents all the time in the university, and they don't have granted patents, they have patent applications. So this is an excellent example of people who know what they're talking about. So is everyone okay just to do a quick run through about what you may or may not know about intellectual property? Because it's actually not very niche. So does anybody, what do people think that intellectual property might be? And patent people don't have to answer. Or I'll run you through an exercise about what do we think the intellectual property might be related to these 3 water bottles?
Trademarks. Trademarks. No.
Please, miss.
Sorry, what's your name?
Mike.
Mike.
So your intellectual property is broken into sections. So you've got class of trade registration, which is things like your name. So if you called it Water Fizz and that didn't exist, that could be your class of trade name. And you would apply for that within a category that included soft drinks and water, but you could apply for it if you wanted in shoes and all different things, but you mainly stick to where you want. Then you can have registered trademark design, so the shape of the bottle, which would be also an intellectual property. And then you could also have a patent if the bottle performed a function that was unique and didn't actually have that function in another way. So it's broken into sections in terms of registration of design name, registration of actual name that you're going to use, and then registration of the inventiveness of the product.
Perfect. So if I collapse from hypothermia here, we can carry on with the lecture. It's great. It's great to know what's available in the room. And actually, we are surrounded by intellectual property all the time, and I think you probably know more about it than you realise. So just to summarise, there are 2 automatic rights. So, and it's disappeared off my slides, copyright is an automatic right. My slides normally have a C, the C in the circle. So has anyone written a book? There's always a hidden, look, you see, there's always, anyone else written a book? Does anyone want to write a book?
I've read a book.
There we go, you see. So copyright is automatic. If you are the author, that's your right. You don't have to apply for it, it's automatic. And likewise, design right is automatic. So I have my 3-bottle example. Each of these has a shape. That's an automatic right. If you invent a machine or a phone, then that is an automatic right. So they're the easy ones that you have. So if you've authored things, all of our slides, that's my copyright. And you should put a copyright on the footer of your slides, really. So then, as mentioned, then there are registered designs. So there's a good chance that all of these 3 from Harrogate, San Pellegrino, and I don't know these people. Am I supposed to know these people? Are these very common?
It's from the North Sea.
Oh. This is from Harrogate, and this is from Europe. So, brilliant. So all of these companies, I would guess, have a registered design on what their product looks like. Trademarks, I think, is the one when you talk to the general public, they see the little TM. That's great. There is no reason not to have a trademark, I don't think. It's quite a neat. Have you got trade?
Yeah, we've trademarked. Everything we do is trademarked.
It's a pretty easy process,
Pretty
isn't
easy.
it?
It's not expensive.
No.
It's definitely worth doing. You often get objections because someone objecting to your trademark, whether that's a good objection or not, will always try and extort money out of you to agree that you can have your trademark. So people will object all the time.
I agree. There is bullying sometimes in trademark.
Yeah.
Sorry, there is?
There is some bullying sometimes in
yes.
trademark. Well, also, what I defended a trademark case, and what I realised, because every trademark case is put on the website, you can see appeal, but it's also capped. So if a company came in, a massive organisation, even if they spent, I don't know, £2 million on solicitors, if they're objecting to a trademark, they can only claim X amount, that is capped. So that's quite important to know, So sometimes people think the size of the company, they're going to throw all their muscle at it. The amount is capped. The amount they pay you, or the amount you pay them, the amount they pay you if they get it wrong is capped. So you don't have to cover the solicitor fees of like £1 million or something. There's a certain cap that they can only charge you. So that's quite important to know.
No,
So,
I'm guessing it's at that stage when you have a choice of appealing, right? Because that's the same thing I had when I applied for it.
You've applied for a trademark?
Trademark.
Excellent. What was it?
Well, it was a name called Time Matrix.
Okay, fantastic.
And I had a Bridgestone with so much paper sent to me saying that there's a reason why. And there's nothing in their product list that anything. They may have somewhere in the paper somewhere, but there's nothing similar. But I had a dossier about that thing from their attorney saying why we can't use the name.
Yeah.
So we thought, well, this is just a waiting game, because they don't want the technology to come into the market. So therefore, we thought, right, rather than appealing it, we'll just carry on, ignore it, and not get the trademark, because we can always change the name later on if we needed to. But I think that there's a lot of bullying there happening.
And what would you say was what was the size of the two parties involved, you and them?
Oh, it's like one's like the blue chip company, loads of deep pocket. You can spend a lot of money, time, attorney, all that kind of stuff. For me, it was just like, okay, we haven't got the resources, we haven't got the time. Even if you had the resources, it'd be the time game then, in terms of how do you really want to be wasting your time trying to fight a battle that's going to be difficult, even if you win it at the end. It's a lot of energy goes into that.
Yeah, and I would say that big global companies actually use it as a strategy. It's a business strategy for them. So I think we all live in a world where we think new technology is a good thing, new products are a good thing, and then there's a big bad real world out there where they don't want any new technology. And I think that certainly in our life sciences sector, when small biotech companies came along, they are not pharmaceutical companies, they are chalk and cheese. But big companies bought exciting technology, not to develop it, but to bury it.
Yeah, that's what I was saying about licensing. Sometimes they just you might enter a contract for licensing, but they have no desire to sell your product, just suppress it.
It goes back to picking that right sort of partner, and it's that relationship really. But I think you need to carry out those sort of checks.
And so I think that there is an issue that on the one hand it looks like it's all other and it's for big business, but actually with both trademarks and patents, the patent office is set up so that any of us can log on and start the process. So it can cost you lots of money. You probably should use patent attorneys that are lawyers. But the reality is we could all sit here and log on to the patent office now and start to engage with that process. So it is actually set up to be available to everybody.
So what I found useful is the partnership with the university, because now it feels like there's a backing of somebody bigger, and that kind of keeps away those bullying away from, so that's probably my perception.
No, it's actually deliberate. The universities the government set up an ecosystem. So the government recognise that you shouldn't, I'll speak from an academic perspective, you shouldn't take a very bright professor and let them set up a company because it's not their skill set. So what they recognised was that you needed to wrap people round, and that was technology incubators where people could have lab space, that's accelerators, and all of the professional services absolutely bought into that. So they do lots of pro bono work in order to just fill this gap, like you said. So it is about tapping into a network that's been government funded, it's been good for the universities, and actually one of the hardest things is accessing people like you who...
Yeah, what we found with the Accelerator programme was a lady who came to Ream Oils. She thought she'd got onto a new idea, but then what we discovered with lead bags and sort of bowel cancer patients, what we then discovered was that a lot of companies will patent a product that's similar to the new design that she developed, and then they just shelve it because they don't want anybody else to actually invent it. So you will find that in the pharmaceutical industry and the devices industry as well, that there might already be a prototype, but they don't want to actually bring it to market.
Yeah. So who do you think owns some of the biggest patent portfolios in the world?
Bill Gates.
Pfizer.
yeah.
Yeah, they're all good. So the technology industries, actually one of the biggest patent holders in the world is Estee Lauder that does face cream.
Wow.
Yeah, wow.
Heard that.
No, one of the biggest. So there you go, extra nugget.
Yeah. Can I also just mention, actually, people, small companies can use sort of, I'd say, trademarks and other things to their advantage. So I always like when you hear the story about, say, somebody started a new company, and there's a famous case about a person in Streatham in London started Googly Cars. And basically it was a private hire company, and it was featured all in the press. And basically the only reason that they did it is because Google basically were taking him to court for thingy infringement. So it was like, okay, I'll change the name, and then he changed it to Alphabet Cars. and then it was back in the press. But basically, just for him, it was actually getting quite good business, and like, I think he's closed down his private hire company now. But I think sometimes it is. I know that's just a very left field example, but you can sort of use it to your advantage in some ways. I'm not saying treading on other people's toes.
I have a question about this. It's like, I know that recently, I mean, Ayurveda is like an ancient Indian sort of like health way of living, etc., etc. And I did read somewhere that one of the universities in the USA was actually trying to patent turmeric.
Yep.
And claim all rights to it. Now, how is that possible? I'm sorry if I'm going off the thing.
No,
how is it possible for them to patent a herb that has been used for 5,000 years plus?
not being a patent attorney, but I would say they won't get a patent for it because there has to be an invention, and there hasn't been an invention. And having said that, American laws are different to our laws. So that comes down to, which bits of DNA can you patent? Well, DNA is DNA, you can't. So, yeah, it gets very sophisticated, but yeah, they're not going to get that.
No, they can only patent it if they mix something with it.
It's an invention, a patent.
Something else. And you can't trademark, you can't trademark something that's in general use, like you can't trademark the word car. Because everyone uses the word car, so you can't trademark it. And you can't patent anything that's existing that hasn't been changed.
A microorganism, you can't patent a microorganism.
I guess, like you said, though, it's the USA, because I know they're trying to trademark or keep sort of like hold of a lot of like cultural indigenous practices that they're now trying. So I suppose it's just a different. It was just a sort of act of interest. It's like, how is it possible for somebody to do that? But
I think also because what a lot of academics don't realise is that this is an asset. This patent, you've probably only spent money on your patent so far, but actually it goes on your books, it's an asset. When small businesses and university businesses get traded, they get traded on their not yet granted patents, because when they get granted, they have tangible value. So I think that's the game they'll be playing.
Can I just add one thing?
Yes.
I think what's also a lot of people have not heard about is actually background and foreground IP. And what I mean to that, so if you're a company coming with, say, something and you want to interact with us as the LLSA, if an academic comes in or a clinician gives you some insights, you're basically generating novel, research really in essence, but the output of that is is foreground IP. So it's not always, and actually it can get a little bit confusing, especially if you are doing sort of applying for grant funding and other things like that. Who owns what background IP and who's bringing what? I'd probably say just the easiest, because I've managed a number of Innovate UK projects in my career, is clearly defining who owns what and actually what you want to get out of it. So mostly I'd say actually the university, if you're working with us and would like to use your product or service as for research purposes and for teaching really, and you go away and commercialise it and get, and actually if it is successful, the university will take a little bit of royalty from that, and that's generally what most universities want to do. There are exceptions, but that's case by case. But that's why it's always good to sort of think.
And now I'll just conclude on this. So for your intellectual property, you have to spend money on it. So have you decided that that's money well spent?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we spent £1.5 million, so it's not insignificant.
Yeah.
and we're granted, and we've sold and licensed out part of the grant. So yeah, we've been patenting for 20 years. So.
Yeah. So it works for you as a business that has a technology.
Yeah, I think though the common misconception with patents, and one of my favourite quotes comes from Elon Musk, which is that a patent is a lottery ticket for a lawsuit. You know, a patent isn't an absolute right that you won't be defeated and won't be beaten in a law case. You know, and you know, you really need to be very clear about the fact that you have absolute protection until someone tests it, and then you have risk. So you have to be fairly sure about what you're doing.
Yeah, and I think that the other subtlety is when you do this, you make your information public. So you get protection for 20 years, but you've made your information public. So a lot of the other things that we work with in manufacturing to do with life science companies, and especially the pharma companies, you know, the guys that build a massive factory to make something, that's not patented, that's know-how, and that's another form of intellectual property. So if you want to keep something secret, your trade secret and your know-how, you actually don't do that. But that's more strategy.
The other thing is that
Yes.
once you've got granted, I mean, I'm assuming that's for Europe or UK, but then how does it affect globally?
So what happens is you file in the country that you live in, yeah?
Yeah.
So you'd file in the UK, and then that would move, once it's been examined from the UK, it would move to what's called an international stage. And at each stage you'd answer objections. There'll be 100 objections. You know, you'll file for a little mist spray on a perfume, and the patent attorney will come up with hose lock, and they'll come up with car washes.
Yeah.
It's all very general. And you go through it and you sift through it and you answer them all. And if you pass everything, then you break out country by country, and then each country examines it. But you can be 3 years in the process, having passed it all, and then you get to somewhere like Korea, which seems to have invented everything. and in 1972 in Korea, some bloke will have turned up and done something similar, and you've wasted all that money, you've gone all of that way.
But then does that mean that the risk is that if you've got to that stage, could that party then claim, coming back to UK, is that they had invented before you did?
No, because patent goes out of date within 20 years. Right. So basically, if someone invented what you did 25 years ago, what it does is just makes your patent void. And you've just wasted, you know, £175,000 going all the way through the process. And you could pay for a very extensive patent search from an attorney to check everything, but it never throws everything up. It always misses stuff, and so it is a gamble. But you know, our strategy is that when you're doing something, £800 for a patent attorney to put patent into the UK, write it properly for you. You've got a breathing space of 18 months to 2 years while you seem protected, and that's what you want to do. And then you make the next decision at the next stage.
But I'm guessing if it's a product that you're developing, or disruptive product, which may require a lot of research to get to a final product,
Mm-hmm.
do you start the patent process before
you can
or after?
for a period of time you can adapt the patent to, so your patent isn't published for 18 months to 2 years in the UK.
Right.
So for 18 months you can play around adapting until it's published, but then when it's published you literally have to put another patent in.
Right.
So it's worth doing as a sort of like a little insurance policy.
And also, I think for business strategy, isn't it? So the technologies that we work with, if you're a small company and you're going to a big pharma company, then they'll, having used the patent process, even if it isn't granted, shows that you know what you're talking about. And again, it's a negotiating position, isn't it? Because it's an asset in being created.
Some of the bigger companies can actually spend all the time trying to work around how to get around the patent, so they can create something that stands up as their own patent, and they basically just rip you off. Or
Yeah.
do it to China and just rip you off anyway.
They'll just rip you off anyway. Yeah, it's true. It's true.
Sorry, one last
Yeah,
one.
no, it's fine. No, it's your session.
Can you patent for a better term, a process? So just to put a bit of colour on that, my startup, in its individual components, they're not novel. It's a digital journal, it's a set of business tools, but the thing that sets us apart is the way these individual components connect together and provide value. Can you patent that element, or is that a very grey area?
Yes, yeah, go on.
You can patent it.
Okay.
So an example of that is there's a company in Haverhill called Label Converters, and they stick labels that are leaflet labels onto packaging, because some packaging hasn't got the room to put. So you basically unpeel this, you get this big label, and the way they stick the label to the product is patented.
Oh, I see that.
The gluing method.
The way they do that.
The way they do it. So
Yeah.
the process is patented, and the way it's held. So that's a process that can be patented.
Got it. Thank you. Yeah.
It's very tricky, isn't it? So a good patent attorneys really have niche specialities. So if you're biomechanics, you want that. If you're a chemist, you want, they're technological. But you have to have a science degree to become a science or engineering degree to become a patent attorney. So you can have one for any speciality. So if a patent attorney works for a law firm and you say, is it raining today? They'll give you a lawyer type answer, won't they? Which is if you get a good relationship with a patent attorney that is more interested in business strategy, then they're not considered to be very good lawyers. But I don't know what your experience is, but some of them will work through your patent strategy with you and have those sort of discussions in the context of what you want to do as a business. Have you found that with your patent attorney?
My experience is that our law firm is 5 times more expensive as a patenting company than our patent office. So our patent attorney, isn't so good with the law, but's good with the patent.
Drafting.
Our law firm is very good with the law of enforcing the patent. So I think you kind of dip into the, so in the beginning, I don't think you need a lawyer to patent. In the beginning, you need a patent officer to patent, and the skill is really keeping the initial description as general as possible. You don't want to hone down into I do X because you could win the case because you do Y and Z. So you want the whole breadth of what you do, as wide as possible,
Okay, yeah.
and you will be forced to hone down. But in the beginning, you can keep it really broad.
But the other thing is when you use patent attorneys, if you're using patents, that's one thing. Using trademarks, they can charge a hell of a lot of money for nothing.
Yeah.
My experience is I've got their own trademarks.
Yeah, and they're like a tenth as qualified, hundredth as qualified.
You can't do the US from the UK, you can't do Europe because of all the protectionism that is going on. But for a UK trademark, it's pretty easy to do yourself.
Yeah.
So save yourself £1,000 and do it yourself.
Brill. Network with the people in the room. So just swiftly moving on to is that okay for everybody? We'll just swiftly move on to the next topic. So I don't think this is very relevant for so who in the room has a product again? Hands up if you've got a product. And have you had anything to do with medical device regulations? Do you need to? Okay, so this is just another, as much as patents and intellectual property is a world, medical device regulation is a world. So basically, there's a global system. We have a system. We have a European system that we've just exited from, but it is actually the European system. America has its own system, which is incredibly similar, except they're a bit not invented here, so we'll make you jump some extra hoops. Other first world countries run an incredibly similar system. And I was just having a discussion with Bobby, is that when Bobby was doing his product, wanted to go to the market, he apparently could make all the decisions about what colour, what shape, To a certain extent, if you're in a healthcare, medical, technical situation, you never have all those freedoms, because somewhere along the line you'll hit the regulatory barriers, and they've already made the decisions that there will be no black products. So it doesn't matter that Bobby really liked his black packaging, black design, because they'll just go, nah, sorry. So in a way, it's awkward because there are more constraints, but because there are more constraints, there are certain mistakes you can't make. So whether you know it or not, things are very, very, very safe because they're regulated. So poisons are regulated, the roads are regulated, medical devices are regulated. The thing that trips people over is this one down here at Class 1 is spectacles and stethoscopes. I mean, for goodness sake, I mean, it's... I can't find one now. The hand, when you do hand sanitizer, you know, if they go into a hospital, they're classified as a medical device, which is bordering on bonkers, really, because if they put in your local sports centre, they're not a medical device. So we've got this sort of massive grey area down here, which actually is doable. I think it's slightly the same example as the trademark example. If you've got something that you want to sell into the healthcare system, it needs to have an approval. And this is the approval you need to do, which means you need to answer the exam questions, like you do with trademark, like you do with a patent. They'll tell you what the questions are, and you simply have to answer them. Some of them you can answer yourself, some of them you ask other people to help you. But then it's all about what Bobby mentioned. It's all about, have you got safe manufacturing processes? Are you using products that need to be regulated? So it actually makes us very, very safe.
Sorry, and what's that process called?
This is medical device regulation.
Oh, it's just the medical device.
Yes, it is the whole medical device regulation. So it means that if you go in for a hip replacement, or if you go in for a heart valve, you'd be pleased to know that it's extremely well regulated. You won't be able to read these. This class 2B is a bone fixation plate. You'd like that to be regulated, won't you? The one that boggles me, condoms are in this classification. I never thought, bone fixation versus a condom. Not quite sure about that one.
There's a risk if they don't work, though.
Sorry?
There's a risk if they don't work. There's a risk if they don't work.
Yeah, and what's the risk to you? And what's the risk to me?
Depends whether I tell the girl the name or not.
Yeah, exactly. Your risk is quite a bit different to my risk. Oh, sorry, not that we have any sort of relationship here.
I'll see you later.
There's a whole host of diseases that could be passed between the two of you.
Shall I show you my list?
Coming out of pneumonia, so that's the first one. So there is a massive process. You won't know anything about it necessarily. There are people whose entire life is known about this. If you're a small business, this is exactly where the accelerators and the university systems do really well. Because just like having people who know about patents, and just like they have people that know about finance, they can hold your hand to direct you. What you can't do, and Nidhi said it, is just don't ignore it. And you probably have to do it much sooner than you think you have to do it. And I think, are you doing an app?
Yeah.
Are you deeply in this system?
This is the first foray into it. I want to break into the NHS. We're nowhere near it yet. It's in the private space at the moment.
Yeah.
But this is why this is really important before I start going down that route too far into the NHS.
Can I add two things? In the experience of running the LLSA, there's two take-home messages I'd say here. One is clearly define what your minimum viable product is. So what I mean by that is, without all the bells and whistles on your product, what does it do? And that's what you want to apply your medical device regulation on. Because actually, we've supported a number of companies that have been going through this process. And they, so I'm just thinking of Shifa. So we were helping one company, and in essence, it was an off-grid CPAP machine that could be used to treat COVID, but they'd got other things attached to it. So blood oxygemeter. They were wanting to sort of have follow-up with patients using blockchain and a number of different other things. But actually, what that meant is actually was shoving their device further up the regulatory.
Yeah, we were going up here.
Yeah, what was actually they were actually putting more barriers to entry for themselves. So, and actually, it's quite hard sometimes to sort of and I'm saying critique a company they've invested a lot of money, time, effort to actually say, look, you need to just pull back a bit, and actually, what is the minimal viable product? And what I'd also say to this is that it links in, because actually they were going over and above what they had done. There was another company that we supported, and it was basically a device that opticians could use. And they'd actually paid for FDA approval and UK approval as a medical device. But actually, when we started to speak to clinicians, and they were like, well, why have they done that? Because it's actually on the NHS procurement framework, it's seen as a consumable item.
Wow.
So it was actually a class 1. but they'd actually paid money out of they'd actually took money out of their own pension to actually get it. They paid about £45,000 because they thought that they were doing it for the right reasons. So there's no sort of hard and fast rule, and you'd probably say this, Jane. It's like I could say actually your device is a class 2A, but actually if you do a few more, if you pull away on a few things, it might be a class 1. So that's why it's always good to engage early to sort of see what it could be. And then actually, if you are wanting to go further up, that's where you can do your product extension or your line extension to then sort of, because actually sometimes if you go up the classes, you're getting, like, if you're selling a pacemaker, that's probably going to be a lot more than you are selling condoms. But it's just sort of balancing that. So that's just a little bit of the insights I'd like to share.
And I'll just conclude, because this is a marketing session, this is marketing approval. It's medical device regulation, but you cannot sell if you haven't got marketing approval. And these regulations give you your marketing approval to sell into England or to sell into Europe.
So it's also approval as well then?
Yes.
And are you giving a copy of this presentation? Because we'd like that.
Oh, this slide.
Well,
Very nice.
yeah, the whole thing. But
Yeah, no, this is my last slide.
Question: If a product has already got European approval,
Yes.
and now that obviously Brexit has happened, if I've got a product and it's got EMA,
Yes.
do I still have to get MHRA approval?
Oh, lovely. You haven't got my timeline slide. This is medical device regulation. It's a fantastic example of how we exited from Europe. There is a slide. Well, there is a slide that took all of these categories with all the dates when we're likely to exit from Europe, and it says if we exit from Europe here, there is this has got an 18-month window. This has got a 2-year window. So when you think that we don't know anything that's going on about post-Brexit, the medical device regulation people worked with. We led on this in Europe. In fact, it was based in London until we Brexited. They just built a massive new building. We led in Europe, built a massive new building. It'd been open about a month when we Brexited. So yes, there is an absolute smooth transition that if something is regulated in Europe at the moment, you're in your 2-year window to say within those 2 years you can carry on selling in England, and then you've got to go through this system. And you'll really get me going on a topic. So it's all about making things safe. So this is for marketing approval. So there's another sort of... So I was going to do my test about people's phones, about what intellectual property you have. My phone's got CE on the back. That's the CE mark that you see on everything. For medical devices, this is the mark that's equivalent. This CE mark tells me that my phone is not dangerous. That's all it does. It just says if I have this, it's not dangerous. It's approved.
The difference with the CE, though, that's self-regulation, isn't it?
Yeah.
So with that, you have to go through the body to get this.
You do, but the ones we work with at the university level are this one. You actually on a class 1, you self-regulate on a class 1, and the type of small businesses that we're working with, like James said, one of them, they were keen to add loads of things to their device. And we said, no, you stay down here because you cannot sell your product until you get approval, and we're going to get you class 1 approval. And then I'm going to finish on an anecdote that I heard yesterday when somebody on the radio was talking about ChatGTP. And like everyone's in a mild panic, aren't they? Is it dangerous? Blah, blah, blah. Is it the rest of it? So if I do some genetic modification or something, like I do a genetic modification or I invent a new heart valve, they're both technologies. They're both new technologies. When we, the public, get to use them, when companies sell them to us, we know they are safe because we have all these worldwide regulations that are generally approved of throughout the world. And the guy said yesterday, that's the problem with ChatGTP. ChatGTP is the equivalent of me inventing genetic modification. And none of this is in place. So it's right that everyone feels a bit panicky. And actually, there aren't these regulations in place for some of the new technologies. There weren't these regulations in place when we invented gene editing, but they are now. So in a way, it's a massive pain to businesses It's good for us, keeps us all in work. But actually it's worth doing because you're actually working in a place that means that when you develop your technology and when you want to sell it to somebody, being in a regulated market is awkward, but it's really a good place to be in the world. That's me done.
Super. So, are there any questions for Jane? Oh.
So you've got your list and you go up there and you say an app, yeah? Is there, where do you go to get the breakdown for an app? Because the regulation would be different to something in the same category. You know,
No, it isn't. No, you answer. The exam questions are exactly the same.
So for example, with an app, our app controls medical dosage on the device.
Yeah.
So if that was hacked, that could kill someone. And
Yeah.
so our app would have to probably have a military grade of encryption. But a spoon in the same category wouldn't need to be military encrypted. So is there a kind of like a subsection that says this is what an app needs to be? Because there's a lot of different dimensions to it.
Yeah, so once you put software into so medical device regulations, they are ahead of it. They've made lots of decisions, but the software side of it is really new. A lot of it hasn't been tested, but you just need to avoid your app making a medical decision, because from what are you going to, as long as it doesn't make a medical, so that class 1 class, as long as it doesn't make a medical decision, if your app makes a medical decision, it will be up there in class 4 with a heart valve. So if you've got software involved, you still go through the identical medical device regulations, but there's a whole bit on software that's very new.
So you can use it as a diagnostic tool, but you can't make that decision just wholly based on the actual results of that tool.
So yours isn't doing that, is it?
No, so what we're worried about is that there's been some app software that for diabetics that controls insulin. Yeah, so you got your phone, you upload your insulin, you can adjust it. That's recently been hacked and people have been killed because you can just whoop up their insulin, remotely from some Russian laptop. Yeah, so there's now talk about military grade encryption where you can change dose levels of medicine, which is obviously what we are doing. But I don't know what the level is or what the standard is and how to find that out.
So I'm going to make a massive guess that if it's only just happened, there won't be a regulation. That won't be included in the regulations, because we only get to these fantastic regulations because it's a very controlled process. People have put cases through. There won't be anything written about that because it hasn't yet happened.
I think it's under an ISO, I assume.
Yeah, but that doesn't control encryption, does it?
No. What do you mean?
Rather, what I'd say, because I've been involved in a few digital projects, it's almost security by design. So inherently, you need to build it from the outset to be, and you look at what the current standards are. So I'm looking at this from I managed a digital Internet of Things project that was using a lot of personal data. And there was sort of like things could be firewalled and everything else like that, but inherently it was privacy by design, but it had to be sort of from the outset. It had to be designed like that. You couldn't sort of get halfway down and say, "Oh, we've got to sort of change things." So what I'd say is, if you have designed an app already, it might actually be better to sort of start afresh with. Because the reason I'm saying that is because there are actually there are one or two agencies that we can signpost to. We have done some work in apps, but more in general really. But there is a process already of the way that you need to sort of do that. And actually, some of the challenges you're facing, medical device manufacturers. So say you've got a heart monitor, because there's people have been sort of I think in the US there were some heart monitors, and they weren't password protected on Wi-Fi and other things like that. And people could go in. So there's simple things, but then it's the way that. So it's like if there's fail safes, they always fail back to sort of a safe state. And there is actually a process. I can't remember what it's fully called. There's sort of a way to go through it, and it's actually it's like a toaster. It's like if you're designing a toaster is inherently safe until you turn it on, but actually putting your fingers in is not necessarily the most dangerous. It could be the actuation mechanism or other things like that. I've got it on my laptop somewhere. And
I think our issues is more around the fact that, taking your toaster example, you have a responsibility to yourself, and you've got to put your hand in it. But if you're relying on a device that can be hacked, there isn't a responsibility you can have for someone hacking into the device and affecting your outcome. That's the kind of what we need to navigate. We're kind of edging on two-stage authentication back to GP, that type of thing. But what we don't know is where the standard is.
And I think you've just mentioned it. So when we take people through applying for their Class 1 medical device regulations, answer the exam questions, most of the answers in those exam questions go, we manufacture according to ISO this. Our poisons are regulated according to ISO this. So it is this funny world where you can map, as Simon mentioned, you actually map back onto ISO standards.
But ISOs generally are just, are you a sterile environment? Are you following process? Do you have a Q&A process? And it's not to do with the actual effective workingness of the end product.
It forces you down a pathway, which gives you a structure and a pathway to go down to ensure that you are.
There are. I know of 2 agencies that will be able to give you the answers to that.
Perfect.
But what I would say sometimes is it's not always translational between industries. So in a previous life, I was managing Innovate UK projects, actually in the rail industry, but actually they were digital projects. But I was working in a similar sort of forum, so SMEs coming into the rail industry, and there was a person from Network Rail there, and there's a company, and they did specialist welding. So they did welding in sort of hyperbaric welding out in oil rigs. They welded nuclear reactors. They did, and they wanted to come into the railways. So they're probably the world's and actually they worked in the military, so they were welding Challenger 2 tanks and everything else like that, so working Official Secrets Act. You want to do work on the railways, and they're like, well, you can't because you've not done all the training and everything else like that. And that is the barrier to get into the railway, and they had to do that to get into that. But in a similar sort of way, there are sort of there's probably a few different sort of standards you may have to follow, but there will be people out there that can help you. You may have to pay for it, but it's...
That's fine. We just want to get it right before we manufacture a million of them.
Or we're good as a sort of a sense-checking exercise is that actually have a look at if there's a technology out there what does similar to what your technology wants to do, what do they do, and then have a look at how yours does it differently. What do you need to do to go over that?
Just to add to that, the way we built Mind Data was privacy by design. With end-to-end encryption, multi-factor authentication. And the first person I brought on was a director of information ethics that helped me design this process, so segregated databases, all of that good stuff. So I'd be happy to introduce you to Jan, because he's had decades of experience in consulting, and he's brilliant at helping architect the right platform, so that if anyone did hack Mind Data, even I as CEO, I can't view the data within the database. It's completely encrypted. So I'd be happy to introduce you to Jan to see if he could advise on that.
Yeah, that'd be great.
I can give just one anecdote actually. In the project that I managed, we had to show that we had to delete people's records. Now you might think, okay, I've got a big database of users of a system. How can you just delete that record? But then actually somebody can come along and say, actually, how can you show me that my data is deleted? Well, how can you show somebody your data is deleted if you've deleted it? So actually, what we had to do, and actually a lot of organisations do. So if you go on to say Amazon, and you've got an Amazon account, and you want to delete your records, they actually don't delete your records, they actually encrypt them. But nobody will be able to access them. So then if you go into Amazon and say, can you show me that you've deleted my records? They're like, yes, here is your encrypted records. So they would have an identifier for you and say name, but they can't get into your records. So actually that's if you're sort of getting rid of Facebook accounts from Meta and other things like that. So there are nuances that I know that's slightly digressing, but it's a lot of thoughts. Are there any further questions for Jane?
Just a quick one, actually. Talking about the NHS, have you come across work or these NHS X Digital and Orca?
Yeah, I think NHS Digital's gone.
Okay.
You know, they come and go, don't they?
Right. Okay.
And yes, Orca's done. No, all of my projects, I tell them to use the Orca process.
Sorry, what is the Orca
Some of these
process?
devices, Orca is the organisation for the review of health and care apps. So anything digital
Orca,
has to go through Orca's approval.
It's a private business set up by a lady, and it was about navigating. It was about setting some standards and some checks so that you could sell, mainly to sell into the NHS. So, yeah, it's a great process when apps were the Wild West. Nice small business.
So as we're going forward with apps, I think,
Yeah.
is it imminent that everybody in the room who've got products, perhaps on that basis with apps related to it, would perhaps need to go through the Orca, and then they want to sell into the NHS service.
Yeah, there's no obligation, but they tick a lot of
They tick the box.
Again, it's a set of exam questions. Have you done this? Have you done this? Have you done this? And I'm not aware that anyone else has got any traction to compare with them.
Sorry, throwing those, I just want to pick your brains on everything, but once you've got MHRA approval, I mean, obviously if you've got a device or a product, how, I suppose it's chicken and egg, how do you then assure you get a nice technology appraisal, and how important is it to your product to get a nice technology appraisal as well as nice guidance?
Yeah, so I would not put anything into the NHS without nice approval.
Do you do that alongside doing MHRA and NICE, or do you do MHRA first and then get the NICE technology approval, which is there no order to it?
No, there is no order to it. And all the NICE system. So NICE only used to evaluate medicines, but now they realise that they have to deal with the digital world. So they've put a huge amount of effort into making.
Sorry, and what's the acronym for NICE mean?
It's the National Institute for Clinical
Care and clinical excellence. So if you hear a news story that there's a new cancer drug and it costs £1 million, it'll be NICE has approved a one-off use of a drug approval. So NICE is a fantastic body. It was set up to make sure that medicines that go into the NHS are good value for money. So you have to do a big health. You have to do your technical work on your drug, and you have to do a health economics argument, and that boils down to whether or not it adds quality of life years. So you get into health economics and quals. I worked with them with the university a couple of years ago on one of their digital programs, just as when NHS Digital X was invented, but I learnt a week ago it had gone. And then they suddenly realised that it wasn't just medicines that went into the NHS, so they're getting up to speed very, very quickly on dealing with devices. They might be one of those organisations, a bit like all of these, that if you approach them, you think they're impenetrable because they're a massive organisation. But in fact, the MRHA and NICE, they're full of people that really want to make it work for people. I mean, so on the one hand, they're bureaucratic, but on the other hand, they are the people that really care that we have these systems in place. That means that people can sell into the NHS, and we have got safe products.